All right, get ready to journey back in time thousands of years. Today we're taking a deep dive into the Vedic period of ancient India, a civilization that laid the foundation for Hinduism and really shaped Indian culture as we know it today. And hey, this isn't just for history buffs if you're prepping for the UPSC exam, especially the GS1 ancient history section. This deep dive is going to be pure gold for you. Think of us as your Vedic guides, breaking down complex concepts, highlighting those must-know facts.
Yeah, it's like chapter 2 of your ancient history textbook. Come to life, we'll unpack all the details, make it all make sense, even if you're just starting your UPSC journey.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock a few thousand years. What exactly was the Vedic civilization? It sounds epic.
Oh, it was. We're talking about a civilization that flourished in ancient India, roughly between 1500 and 600 BCE. And it wasn't just some random blip in history. The Vedic civilization was a powerhouse of ideas, rituals, and social structures that impacted everything that came after. It's like the DNA of Indian culture. And you gotta understand it if you want to understand India today.
So it's not just about memorizing dates for the UPSC exam. It's like understanding the soul of a civilization.
Yeah, exactly. And a huge part of that soul is found in the Vedas.
Okay, hold on. What exactly Ayya says of Veda? Is it like a giant history book? Some kind of philosophical thing?
Think of it more as a compilation of ancient wisdom. Hymns, prayers, rituals, even spells. The word Veda comes from the Sanskrit root vid, which means to know. It's all about knowledge, the sacred kind. And get this, the Vedas were passed down orally for generations, before they were ever written down. Imagine the memorization skills involved there.
Wow, that's incredible. The ultimate oral tradition. So how many of these Vedas are we talking about?
There are 4 main ones: the Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. Don't let those names intimidate you. You're each like a different chapter in the story of the Vedic civilization.
All right, let's dive into those chapters. First up, the Rig Veda. What makes this one so special?
Well, first of all, it's the oldest. Think 1500 to 1000 BCE. And it's like a treasure chest for understanding early Vedic beliefs. It's full of hymns to different gods, stories about them, and even insights into the social structures of the time. Ever heard of the Gayatri Mantra, that super famous hymn in Hinduism? Yeah, that's in the Rig Veda.
So if I want to show off my Vedic knowledge, I should start with the Rig Veda.
For sure, it's like the foundation of the Vedic house. And another important thing for the UPSC exam, too, the Rig Veda is our main source of info for the early Vedic period. It gives us a look into a society that was mostly pastoral, where cattle were super important and the rituals were simpler compared to later times.
Got it. Rig Veda, foundation of Vedic knowledge, check. What about the next one? The Yajurveda. Any cool stories in there?
The Yajurveda is less about stories and more about action. Think of it as the Vedic ritual handbook. Lays out all the instructions for performing sacrifices and ceremonies. You know, keep the gods happy.
So like a step-by-step guide to Vedic worship. Sounds important. How's it different from the Rig Veda?
Well, it's in prose instead of verse, more like a manual than poems. And it's divided into black and white sections, which are basically different arrangements of the text, almost like different versions of the same ritual manual.
Interesting. So we've got the poetic Rig Veda and the practical Yajurveda. What about the Samaveda? Does it bring something new?
The Samaveda is all about music. It's a collection of verses from the Rig Veda, but they're arranged specifically for singing. Imagine these ancient melodies echoing through ritual spaces, creating this really powerful atmosphere.
Wow, that's pretty cool. The Vedic soundtrack. So we've got hymns, rituals, music. What's left? The Atharva Veda.
You saved the most interesting one for last. The Atharva Veda is like peeking into the daily lives of Vedic people, full of spells, charms, and incantations for everything, from healing illnesses to warding off evil spirits, even spells for love and success.
So like the Vedic self-help guide. That's fascinating. It gives you a sense of what people were worried about back then.
Exactly. It shows us that even in ancient times, people had hopes and fears, just like us today.
Okay, so we've got these 4 Vedas, each with its own unique thing going on. But are they just big collections of hymns and spells? Or is there more to them?
There's definitely more to unpack. Each Veda is divided into 4 parts: Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. Remember those terms for your UPSC exam? They pop up in questions all the time.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the difference between, say, a Samhita and an Upanishad?
Think of it like this. The Samhitas are the core, the hymns, the prayers, the spells. The Brahmanas are like commentaries. They explain the rituals, their symbolism, their importance, like Cliff's Notes for Vedic ceremonies.
So if I want to understand why they did a certain ritual, I should check the Brahmanas.
Exactly. Now, the Aranyakas, they go deeper. They're more philosophical. They explore the inner meanings of rituals, how they connect to the individual's spiritual journey. These were studied by hermits and sages who were searching for enlightenment, like advanced Vedic studies.
Interesting. So it's like a progression.
Yeah.
From the practical stuff
Yeah.
to the philosophical. What about the Upanishads? Where do they fit in?
Oh. The Upanishads are the crown jewels of Vedic thought. They mark a shift. From outward rituals to inward reflection, they grapple with big questions like, what is reality? What is the self? What happens after death? They introduce concepts like Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the ultimate reality. A lot of core Hindu beliefs came from the Upanishads.
Wow. So the Upanishads are like the bridge between the Vedic period and Hinduism.
You could say that. They're essential reading if you want to understand the philosophy behind Hinduism.
Okay, making a note. Upanishads. Check. So we've got a handle on the Vedas, but who are the people behind all this? Who is chanting these hymns, performing these rituals, pondering all these deep philosophical questions?
That's where we meet the Vedic Aryans, but before we go there, it's important to clarify that Aryan is a linguistic term, not a racial one. It refers to people who spoke Indo-European languages.
Ah, good point. So it's more about language and culture than about race.
Exactly. And historians believe that these Vedic Aryans migrated from Central Asia to northwest India sometime in the 2nd millennium BCE. There's archaeological evidence to back this up, like the Andronovo culture in southern Siberia and the painted grayware pottery found in parts of India. They suggest connections to these migrations.
Okay, that makes sense. But didn't the Harappan civilization already exist in India then? What happened when the Aryans showed up?
That's a great question, and it's something that historians are still figuring out. The transition from the Harappan civilization to the arrival of the Aryans is a bit of a mystery. We do know that the Aryans brought their own culture, language, and religious beliefs, and those eventually mixed with existing Indian traditions to form the basis of what we call Hinduism. Fascinating puzzle, isn't it? How these cultures all mixed together and influenced each other. And speaking of influence, remember how we talked about those Aryans migrating to India? Well, they didn't just bring their language and beliefs, they brought their livestock, too.
Livestock. Wait, are we talking about cows? Because I got to say, the source material mentions cows a lot.
Yeah, cows were a huge deal in the Vedic period. If you want to understand the social, economic, even religious side of things, you got to understand the importance of cows.
Okay, I'm listening. So were cows like pets back then?
Mm-hmm.
Or just walking hamburgers?
Well, they were a food source, yeah. But their importance went way beyond that. Think of cows as like a symbol of wealth and prosperity in Vedic society.
So the more cows you had, the richer you were.
Yeah, pretty much. The more cows you had, the wealthier and more powerful you were. And this is reflected in their language. For example, the word gomat. It means possessing cows. It was used to describe a wealthy person.
So like calling someone a big shot. But instead of money, it's all about how many cows you have. That's pretty funny. Were there any other cow terms that show how much they loved these animals?
Oh yeah, tons. The term gavishti, that refers to battles or raids to capture cattle, shows you how important cows were. They were worth fighting for.
Wow. Cattle rustling, Vedic style. So it wasn't all peace and harmony back then.
Not always. Resources were valuable, right? And cows were a prime target. And remember, Gopati, the title for the chief, that literally means protector of cows, shows the leader's responsibility to safeguard this important resource.
Right. Like the chief was the ultimate protector of the cows.
Yeah.
But seriously, it makes sense. If cows were that important, you'd want someone making sure they're safe.
Exactly. And they weren't just important for wealth and status. Cows were also super important to their religious beliefs.
Okay, so we're going beyond economics now, into spirituality. How did cows fit into their religious practices?
In Vedic religion, cows were often seen as sacred, like divine beings. They represented abundance and fertility, and they were associated with certain deities and thought to have a special connection to the cosmic order.
So they were like living symbols of the divine. That's pretty cool.
It is. And you see this reverence in their rituals and practices, like offering milk and ghee from cows was a common way to honor the gods.
Makes sense. Give the gods the best stuff you have. So we've covered economics and religion. What else? Did cows play any other roles in Vedic society?
You know what? They even influenced how they measured time. God Huli, a term from the Rig Veda, refers to the time of day when cows come home from grazing, like their version of sunset, but with cows.
Huh? That's great. They had their own cow time.
Exactly. And get this, even the word for daughter, duhitri, is believed to have come from the root da, which means to milk. So a daughter was literally one who milks the cows. Shows you how important they were to the household.
Wow, their whole language is connected to cows. It's amazing how important these animals were to their entire culture.
It is. And speaking of culture, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how the Vedic period has impacted modern India. This isn't just ancient history. This is a legacy that's still shaping Indian society and culture.
Okay, so now we're fast forwarding a few thousand years, bringing it all back to the present. I'm curious, how did this Vedic period, with all its rituals and social structures, really influence India today?
That's a great question. And it's a really important one for UPSC aspirants, especially for those essay questions about India's history and how things have changed and stayed the same.
Right, it's not just memorizing facts. It's about understanding the connections, cause and effect. So where do we start? How did the Vedic period shape India today?
Let's start with the most obvious one, religion. The Vedic period is like the foundation of Hinduism, one of the oldest religions in the world.
Okay, so we're talking about the origins of Hinduism. How did Vedic beliefs and practices evolve into Hinduism today?
It's a long process, but some key things can be traced back to the Vedic era, like the pantheon of gods. Many of the gods we see in Hinduism today, like Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, they have roots in Vedic gods. Their roles and personalities may have changed over time, but the idea of a divine pantheon, that started in the Vedic period.
So it's like these old gods got a makeover, but they're still basically the same.
Exactly. And it's not just the gods. The concepts of karma and reincarnation, super important to Hindu philosophy, those also have roots in Vedic thought. The idea that our actions have consequences, that we reap what we sow, that the soul goes through many lifetimes, those were all explored during the Vedic period.
So when we see those pictures of the cycle of birth and death in Hindu art, we're actually seeing ideas that were first thought up thousands of years ago.
You got it. The Vedic period is the source of many core beliefs and practices that we see in Hinduism today. And it's not just abstract ideas, even rituals and festivals we see in Hinduism today come from the Vedic period.
Oh, wow. Really? So those big celebrations like Diwali and Holi,
Yeah,
they have a connection to the Vedic period.
absolutely. Diwali, the Festival of Lights, is thought to have come from the Vedic Harvest Festival, a celebration of abundance and prosperity. And Holi, the Festival of Colors, that has connections to ancient spring rituals that are mentioned in Vedic texts. These festivals have evolved over time, of course, but their roots are in the Vedic era.
That's incredible. It's like a direct connection to the past. You can actually experience history. It makes those festivals even more meaningful. So we've covered religion. What else about India today was shaped by the Vedic period?
Another big one is social structure. The Varna system, remember, that had a huge impact on Indian society. Not always a good one, though.
Right. The Varna system, with its 4 classes, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, started as a way to organize society based on what people did for a living. But then it became the caste system, a pretty complicated legacy.
It is, and it's a tough topic to understand. The Varna system, as it was first thought up, was probably meant to create social harmony, but it ended up becoming a source of inequality and discrimination.
It's like even well-intentioned ideas can have unintended consequences, especially when you throw power dynamics into the mix.
Exactly, and it's important to see both the good and bad things about the Vedic period. It's not about saying the past was perfect. It's about understanding how the past shaped the present.
Okay, so religion and social structure. 2 big areas where we see the impact of the Vedic period. What about politics and government? Did those ancient kings and their ideas influence how India is governed today?
Well, the Vedic period didn't have the kinds of political institutions that we see today, like democracies, but some of their ideas did influence later Indian political thought. The concept of a king, for example, was really important. The king, or Raja, was seen as a protector, someone who upheld dharma, the cosmic order.
So it wasn't just about being strong and powerful. The king had to rule fairly.
Yeah. The ideal king was one who governed according to dharma, making sure his people were taken care of, and maintaining cosmic harmony. This idea of righteous governance was really important throughout Indian history, and it influenced rulers and thinkers for centuries.
Wow, that's interesting. So even though the political systems have changed a lot, some of those basic ideas about leadership have stayed the same.
Exactly. And it's not just politics. We can even see the impact of the Vedic period on India's economy.
Really? How so? I thought their economy was all about, like, cows and bartering.
Well, cows were super important, yes, and bartering was common. But remember how they shifted from being pastoral to being more agrarian? That change had a lasting effect on India's economy.
Right. India is still really focused on agriculture today.
Exactly. The Vedic period saw the development of new agricultural techniques. They domesticated animals for plowing and started growing different kinds of crops. This was really important for India's economic development.
So like they planted the seeds for an agricultural powerhouse. Are we saying that India's economic success today is because of the Vedic period?
Well, not entirely. India's economy is way more complicated than that. But the Vedic period's focus on agriculture, trade, and exchange did set the stage for later stuff.
Okay, so we've talked about religion, social structure, politics, even economics. Seems like almost everything about India today has some connection to the Vedic period.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's like looking at this tapestry and seeing how all these ancient threads are woven into India today.
I like that. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember? What should they take away from this discussion about the Vedic period and its impact on India?
I think it's this: the idea of continuity and change. The Vedic period didn't just vanish. Its ideas, beliefs, and practices kept going. They adapted, and they influenced India over thousands of years. If you want to understand Indian history and culture, you have to understand this interplay between things staying the same and things changing.
That's a great point. It's not just what happened back then, it's how the past still shapes the present.
Right. And speaking of shaping the present, we still have one more part of our deep dive to go. I can't wait to explore some of those unanswered questions and hopefully leave our listeners thinking about the Vedic period long after this episode is over.
All right, welcome back for the final part of our Vedic journey. We've covered so much ground. Deciphering ancient hymns, tracing the roots of Hinduism. We even dove deep into the world of cows and their VIP status in Vedic society.
And now, it's time to connect the dots and answer the big question. What can we, in the 21st century, actually learn from a civilization that existed thousands of years ago, especially for those of you who are aspiring UPSC officers? You'll be tasked with shaping the future of India.
Okay, that's a huge question. It's easy to get caught up in all the historical details. But what does it all mean for us today? For how we understand India? For how we act as citizens?
One thing that really stands out to me is the Vedic people's ability to adapt. Remember how they shifted from a pastoral society to an agrarian one?
Yeah.
They adopted new technologies, like iron tools, and changed their social structures to make it all work.
Right. They weren't afraid of change. They were willing to evolve and come up with new ideas.
Exactly. And that's a really important lesson for us today, especially in a world that's constantly changing. Technology is advancing, the climate is changing, social norms are shifting. The Vedic period reminds us that being able to adapt is key if you want to survive and make progress.
So it's not about holding on to the past. It's about learning from it and using those lessons to face the challenges of today.
Exactly. And speaking of challenges, the Vedic period gives us some insights into how complex social organization can be. The Varna system, even though it eventually became the caste system, shows us an early attempt to create a structured society where everyone had a place.
Okay, but the caste system is a huge problem. What can we possibly learn from that?
Well, it's not about saying that the caste system is good. It's about understanding where it came from and how it developed. The Vedic period reminds us that social hierarchies, even the ones that are supposed to create order and harmony, can become rigid and unfair if they aren't constantly reevaluated and changed.
So it's a warning. It reminds us to be careful, to make sure that social structures aren't being misused, and that we always fight for equality and justice.
Exactly. And it's not just about social structures. The Vedic period also offers some interesting thoughts about the search for meaning and purpose. Remember those Upanishads we talked about? They tackle some pretty deep questions about who we are, about the universe, about what's real.
Right. They were like the deep thinkers of the Vedic period. But what can we learn from them today?
Well, they remind us that the search for meaning and purpose is a human thing. The Vedic people, even though they lived thousands of years ago, asked the same big questions that we're still asking today.
So even though the answers might change, the questions stay the same. It's a reminder that we're all part of this human story, trying to understand the world and connect with each other.
Exactly. And speaking of connection, the Vedic period also shows us how important community is. And shared values, those rituals, those hymns, those social structures, they all point to a society where people were connected by shared beliefs and practices.
So it's a reminder that we're not just individuals, we're part of something bigger.
Right. And that sense of community, of shared values, it's super important today, especially in a world that can feel so divided.
It's like we need to rediscover those things that bring us together, to build bridges, not walls. Okay, so we've talked about adaptability, social structures, philosophy, and community. What's the final takeaway? What do you want our listeners to remember?
I think the big takeaway is this. The Vedic period, even though it was so long ago, has a lot to teach us about what it means to be human. It teaches us about resilience, about our desire for knowledge, about our search for meaning. And as we face the challenges of the 21st century, we need to remember that we're not starting from scratch. We're building on what came before us. And the Vedic period is a really important part of that foundation.
That's a powerful thought. It's like carrying a torch, passed down through generations. And we have to keep that flame burning bright. Well, that brings our deep dive into the Vedic period to a close. It's been amazing exploring the roots of Indian civilization and discovering insights that still matter today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.